Okay, fine. So let's just continue from where we were. So I was basically sharing with all of you that the benchmark of assessment is changing. Instead of looking at the volume of the debt, we'll be looking at the volume of the interest on your PNL. Going forward, if this proposal has goes through. Okay, and the benchmark changes on how much interest cost is being incurred in a year. Okay, and interestingly this interest includes interest from all your sources of financing. Okay, so this does not include interest only if you have borrowed, let's say, from related parties. Okay, even your bank borrowings are going to be included for the purpose of calculation of this volume. So this is very very significant. Okay, uh, because now the new finance bill is saying that you will be allowed interest cost as a deduction for computing your taxes only to the extent of 30% of your operating profit. Okay, so the benchmark is very much defined now, that you will not be allowed any interest cost beyond 30% of your operating profit while calculating taxes. When I say operating profit, it is also commonly called EBITDA, earning before interest, tax and depreciation, but I'm using a similar term, a more simpler term called operating profit. Okay. Now let us understand that why this is a significant shift, for us in Kenya. Okay. The reason why we believe it's a significant shift, because let's understand that Kenya is a high tax paying jurisdiction. We are a 30% tax paying jurisdiction. Okay. And in high tax paying jurisdiction, what happens is that the investors, prefer to use debt, as a way of financing their business instead of, injecting a lot of equity capital in the business. And there is a very commercial reason, why that is done, is because debt is tax deductible, right? The interest that you pay on the debt, it is tax deductible. While if you were to inject equity capital, you only get dividend returns, and dividends are paid after all corporate taxes and everything is paid. So in all tax paying jurisdictions, debt capital is largely used because it gives you the tax shield benefit. So let's say in Kenya, if you are borrowed at 11% or 12% interest rate, your effective interest rate is actually only 8.9% because you get a 30% tax break. So that is one reason for the debt. The second reason, for use of lot of debt in Kenya is that, my withholding tax on the interest is 15%. Okay. And my withholding tax on dividend is also 15%. So if I'm a foreign shareholder, okay, I would prefer to inject, debt capital, because I can get an interest deduction for it, right? Eventually, I will anyway suffer 15%. So why not take the benefit, of injecting, debt capital? And lastly is obviously that it gives protection to the private shareholders, because in the risk of insolvency of a company, okay, your liability is only restricted to the capital that is not paid. Okay, otherwise private shareholders are pretty much protected. So these are the reasons why debt capital injection in Kenyan company is generally quite high. And now with this change and shift of the gear, where we are limiting the amount of interest to be allowed. Okay, it will require highly leveraged companies to relook at the balance sheet and do the balancing. Now, coming to where we see that there are major implications. Okay, is that if you have disproportionate amount of debt on your balance sheet, okay, as a percentage of your total capital employed, okay, which is not generating enough returns. Okay, please mind my words what I'm saying, that if you have disproportionate amount of debt capital on your balance sheet, which is not generating enough returns or not generating enough operating profits, you will be punished by restriction of interest cost on your tax computation. Your interest coverage ratio or your operating profit should at least be 3.5 times or more of your interest cost estimated for the year. Okay, so the focus is now shifting on the profitability of the companies, okay, through these provisions coming. Okay, then also remember that there is another angle to this whole discussion, is that uh, largely geared companies, highly leveraged companies, when they go down, okay, it also costs, financial distress in the economy. And, we've looked at, recent cases. We are all aware that, what's happened with the last supermarkets in the country, or, with some of the banks in the last 3 4 years, right? Where, with them going down, it has locked up, a large block, of cash flow, okay, for many players in the market. So there's a ripple effect, of blocking of this cash flow if there is financial distress, okay, in large players. And, and some companies, from our experience, we are also saying that, some companies are resorting to cross subsidizing debts, okay, where you use one company which is profitable, it is heavy on balance sheet, it has got collaterals available. You use that company to borrow, and then you give that money, to another company interest free, okay, which is still, let's say, not reached this break even. So this crop subsidization of loan also results in high debt on your balance sheet with technically no income being generated, from those. So I think, these provisions are like, new ways of anti-tax avoidance, principles. I must also share, at the last, that this new proposal is not new when it comes to global norms. Okay, we have countries, like France and US, Germany, Russia, who have similar provisions in their income tax law where they restrict the interest. But the issue that I see with this proposal is is that, we have borrowed some global principles, okay, from developed countries, okay, but we have left, some of the exemptions that also exist, okay. We have taken a very strict interpretation and borrowed the strictest interpretation from there, okay. For example, there are no safe harbor provisions that you will be exempted, on your interest cost, let's say, up to 20 million shillings, okay. We will not apply if your interest cost is, let's say, 20 million or lower. Okay? So what we mean to say that it's going to affect everyone, even if you bought, let's say, a commercial investment property on, on mortgage, and, and you are basically earning renters on it, okay, but you are still in your initial years of servicing of the mortgage, right? Then there is a high likelihood that your rental income or your rental yields are not 4 times, of your interest cost, okay. So, I believe that, and as a firm we believe that, as we bring this stricter norms in, we should also have, some safe harbor rules, some relaxation, so that, it attacks, at the right place and not everyone. The second issue I see with this proposal is that there is no benefit of carry forward of unabsorbed interest. So let's say, in my current year, my interest cost is higher because, I have put up new plant and machineries, or my business is new, and my interest is higher, my revenue is still catching up, right? So I will have some unabsorbed interest because of this provision. Now I should be allowed generally, to carry forward this unabsorbed interest in the later years, okay, as long as I'm within the 30%, limit. Not having this unabsorbed cost of interest being allowed to carry forward is really a capital loss, okay, for companies in the initial years. And I think that, this provision should be looked into. Okay? And finally, we have placed, bank borrowings and all other kind of borrowings all in the same basket, which I think is a bit unfair. Okay, because, I mean, all of us know what it takes to get a loan, from a Kenyan bank, right? And, they have already applied, strictest test of solvency on your business before allowing you a loan. Okay, so hence, treating the threshold of bank borrowings and all the other third-party loans in the same basket, looks a bit unfair. Even, developed economies, there are enough example, like Russia allows banks allow you to borrow up to 12 and a half times of your equity, okay, as part of, norms. And all other, areas, tax authorities say up to 3 times. So there are different thresholds depending on what is your source of lending, when it comes to leverage. So I think, Matthias, I think with those provisions, and, sort of some analysis around this, I believe that this provision is important to watch through for companies, which are highly leveraged and still are not generating enough free cash flows, from their operations. I would also like to just last highlight, and before we move to the next point and over to Matthias after that, is that there is an existing provision under ThinCap which says that if you have foreign shareholders and you borrow from them free, which means that if they're not charging you any interest, then there's a provision which says that KRA can deem interest on that loan at a treasury bill rate of 8%, 9%, and then you'll be asked to pay the withholding tax on this deemed interest. Now, I want to just highlight that as these new provisions are coming in relating to interest restriction clauses, this provision has not changed. This provision, remains the same, the way it is. So we will need to look at both the sides, your bank borrowings, your related party borrowings, and those borrowings that you're still getting without interest cost. So that's why we sort of thought that it's important that we highlight these changes. I think Matthias, back to you.
Thank you, Simant, for that clarity. The next point we're going to discuss on control, but before we discuss on control, allow us to take a short poll again to just jog our memory on what we still remember on control. Just a minute, then we can proceed on our detailed discussion on this. Take just a minute to do this, please. Thank you so much for that. Now, Simant, before I talk about control, going through the changes that are coming, the definition of control seems to have changed. Why should we worry on this new definition of control? And which are the areas that are going to be impacted by this change? We need to know these impacted areas and maybe a detailed understanding of what is this aspect of control in terms of our understanding and how it's going to affect us. To you, Simant.
Right. Thanks, Mathis. So, yes, I think the first area whenever a new change is coming is to, before we get into deliberations on what are the changes, let's, understand where does it hit us, where does it impact us. It impacts in the positive sides, on the negative sides. So I think, based on our, research, of the income tax law, we found that, this definition of control, hits this 5 main areas, right? And it basically dwells upon the fact that, who is actually in the real control of the business. Okay. That is what, the new provisions are about to do. And it attacks, these 5 areas. First is, just like, as individuals, we have our tax residency. Even, corporates have their tax residency. And there are various norms applied. One of the simple norms is that where it is registered. But where I think, it impacts Kenyan companies is that if you have, let's say interests in companies which are outside Kenya, and especially in offshore jurisdictions like BVI or Cayman Islands and the likes, right? Then, and if those companies which are outside Kenyan jurisdictions are being controlled and managed from Kenya, okay, mind my words, if these companies are being controlled and managed from Kenya, okay, then even if they are registered outside Kenya for tax purposes, they will be deemed to be tax residents in Kenya, which means that their business profits becomes taxable in Kenya. So now with this change in control, I think everyone needs to assess if you have companies which are controlled, foreign companies controlled from Kenya, then is it dramatically going to change, your structure? Then I think, thin capitalization part we have already covered. I will come to the transfer pricing regulations. Transfer pricing regulations, currently are applicable, when you have transaction between 2 related parties, where one party is a foreign company, okay, and basically they are not resident in Kenya. So obviously, when you expand the definition of control, which will come to in the next section, then there is a high possibility that your transfer pricing study scope is going to expand, okay, by including more companies for testing the arm's length of it. And the last part is, on capital gain tax calculations, that if you're doing, sale of property or shares, between 2 related companies, and if they meet the definition of control, then, you cannot just subject them, to a lower value and pay lower capital gain tax. You will be subjected, to fair market value and arm's length testing. So I think these are the main areas, that we thought that, will be important to highlight, before we come to the changes. Now, coming to the changes, okay. Now, we asked, a question on the poll that is there any definition of control under the income tax law? And interestingly, you will know that at this point of time, there is no definition of control under the income tax law. because I think when during the COVID times, COVID tax measures were being released and a lot of changes were being done in the tax law, this definition was accidentally removed and it was never came back. So if you ask me, until the new law comes in, there is no definition of control under the income tax. Having said that, let's go back what it used to be, pre-COVID times, right? It's very simple. If you, in a body corporate, any person owning 25% or more in the shares of voting power, okay, will be deemed to have been exercising control on that company when it comes to body corporate. If it comes to partnership, it's simple: 50% or more of your say into the assets or profit of that company, you'll be assumed to exercise control on that company. Now, what is the new provision doing? It has brought down that threshold of 25% to 20% now. Okay, so the thresholds have come down, which means that more parties will get caught between 20 to 25% gain, to be called as controlling shareholders. Then comes interesting definitions, which has got nothing to do with your shareholding or directorship. If you have taken a loan from any person and that loan accounts for minimum 70% of the book value of your total assets, okay, mind my words, if you've taken a loan from someone and that loan accounts for minimum 70% of the book value of your total assets on the balance sheet, that lender will be deemed to be exercising control on the company. Number three, if you are a company that is 100% dependent on utilization of a know-how or a trademark or a copyright to run your business, that trademark owner or the know-how owner will be deemed to exercise control of your company, even if they are not on your CR12, even if they are not shareholder. Then comes another two very interesting points. If your sales are highly concentrated to few parties, and if any party accounts for minimum 90% of your sales, okay, then that customer is now deemed to exercise control on your company. And similarly, if you're purchasing, from selective buyers and those purchases from those companies account for 90% or more, those suppliers will be deemed to exercise control on the company. And then, there are clauses that if someone has given personal guarantee or guarantees in respect of your indebtedness in terms of your borrowings, which are again, 70% or more, those people who have given guarantees will be deemed to exercise control. And the last one is pretty straightforward. Anyone who's in the control to exercise more than 50% of the board will be deemed to exercise control. So now, what we are basically getting into with this new definition of control, okay, is that gone are the days of only looking at CR12 and shareholders and common directors to understand who is a related party who exercises control. These definitions are now going to take us to substance. Who is in real control of this company? What is the substance of relationships, with the customers, with the lenders, with people who are funding the business, with people whom we are buying, right? Because I think, one of the areas that I have realized, in my various stakeholder meetings with KRA is that there are a lot of imposter businesses in Kenya, right? Which is you get hold of few people and make them as owners and directors on the face of the company, but in the back end, the entire sale, purchase, funding is being dealt, by a third party who are not in the front side. And I also, believe that, these kind of structures are a big risk, to Kenya, because, there are risks relating to terror financing, there are risks relating to drug trafficking and similar, nuances, that affects, us beyond, just taxes. So I think these provisions are also coming in to find out, who are in real control of the business. Number two, as I shared, that transfer pricing documentation scope has been expanded. Correct? So as more parties, are caught by these 7 provisions, you will have to include them in your transfer pricing study and to confirm that your transactions with them are on arm's length basis. Arm's length is nothing but willing buyer, willing seller relationship has been applied, okay, while determining prices and determining profit. So there is no shifting of profit, from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. If it is a willing buyer, willing seller, relationship. I think foreign controlled companies risk, I think I've already covered. I think the last part is that, if you are, a large distributor, which is distributing exclusive distributorship brand agreements, if you have, right, then it is very likely that you will get caught, somewhere in clause 5, purchase concentration, or if you are, selling, to one large, customer, then you get caught in the sales concentration. So I think, the documentation part, can expand, and some of these parties can be deemed as related. Having said that, I think as long as you get your TP document right, and your transactions are benchmarked appropriately, ideally it should not be a problem. But I think scrutiny is increasing, okay, with these provisions. So, Matthias, I think I've covered my points on control. Over to you.
Yes, Iman, thank you so much for that elaborate coverage. Now, permanent establishment is one area that has caught the eye of a taxman. At this point, you want to understand, Sumant, on permanent establishment changes, who should be worried? And looking at these changes closely, does it impact all taxpayers? Please shed lights on this area.
Right, sure. So basically, permanent establishment rules largely, impact non-resident companies who are operating in Kenya. Okay. This is our experience, with our clients, who are also operating branch offices and license offices. That kind of structures are under immediate scrutiny with permanent establishment rules. Now, remember that, this is not, some new rule that has come in, right? These rules have, global norms on permanent establishment has always been there. Even the Kenyan income tax law has rules on permanent establishment. Just that now we have imported the entire global guidance and brought it under the income tax. I think the import of the entire gamut of provision is what has come in. But these rules are pretty mature. They've always been there from a global tax norm perspective. So I don't think like domestic companies, companies who have been operating here, doing appropriate sale purchase transactions, doing third party transactions, arm's length transactions. These companies are not impacted by permanent establishment rules. Basically non-resident companies operating in Kenya, branch offices, license offices companies. If there are some agents you have appointed in Kenya and they are completely only doing business with you, and then we call them dependent agents, right? These are structures that will get impacted, by permanent establishment rules. So I don't want to go in a lot of detail, on this slide because it's a plethora, to discuss. But I think most of our clients who are in this zone, we have already done an appropriate advice to them. I would just say that two areas in this, that if let's say you bring a consultant from China or from Hong Kong or from India, and they are working on any projects in Kenya, and they end up spending more than 90 days, okay, then just remember that just doing withholding tax doesn't relieve you of your responsibility, right? Those companies will now be required to declare their entire income from those service projects in Kenya and pay corporate tax on that. That is what this provisions does. It attributes your entire profit relating to the business you have done in Kenya and pay the entire corporate tax on that in Kenya, instead of just getting away by paying withholding tax from your suppliers. Same thing on construction sites, installation projects. If you have companies coming from outside Kenya and doing being on the site and doing running construction site, running installation projects, and if these projects go for more than 6 months time, then again you'll be deemed to have business in Kenya, and your entire profit on that project will be subject to corporate tax, irrespective of whether you have a company in Kenya or not, irrespective of whether you have been subjected to only withholding. So I think this is a very intricate area. It's good to know. I would suggest that a lot of us, if you're dealing with someone from outside Kenya, a foreign enterprise whom you're calling here, for doing any of these kind of services, you can just alert them, about this provision, and detailed understanding and detailed assessments, can be done with their respective, auditors and taxes. I think with that, Matthias, we can over back to you.
Thank you, Sumant, for that sharing that area. Now, the other area that you want to look at is a new norm of common reporting standard. And I would urge participants just to take a minute also, again, to jog our memory. What do we know about this CRS, Common Reporting Standard? Just take a minute and let us jog our memory briefly before we go in-depth discussion on this area. Thank you for your feedback. Now, Sumant, we understand that CRS is an anti-tax avoidance provision and is a global norm that has been adopted over 100 countries. With CRS now being included under finance bill in Kenya, what should we know about this, and how will this impact us? Please assist us to have a clear perspective on this area. Yes, man.
Sure. Thanks, Mathis. So again, as you mentioned, very correctly, Matthias, that CRS, has is an anti-tax avoidance measure again. Just like what we have discussed, the thin cap provisions and the control provisions. This is also an anti-tax avoidance provision. Okay? These rules, again, I would say that have been in place for some time. Kenya, for example, has moved very systematically when it comes to common reporting standard. In 2016, they went and signed their commitment to CRS. Then, we had 2 years of foreign tax amnesty, where people with offshore wealth and offshore companies and offshore bank accounts were allowed, to avail the benefit of declaring that, without any payment of taxes. So we had the second phase, where the foreign tax amnesty came in, and now is when we are getting into taking CRS as a law, okay, into the country. So that's the history, and this is like 4 or 5 years, and many countries, more than 100 countries around the world are already part of this CRS club, run by the OECD. So what is so unique about CRS, okay, is that, see, this exchange of information about taxpayers currently also exists. Okay, it is not something new, but the only difference is that currently the information has to be asked to be shared. Okay, so let's say if I have a double tax treaty, with another country, or we have intergovernment agreements, with other country, with Kenya, right? You can seek an information about a taxpayer on a pretext of an investigation or other matter, right? But you have to ask for that information. What CRS is doing, that it is an automatic exchange of information. Okay? So what happens is that once you are once you've committed and signed and ratified and you come in as part of the CRS club, right? Now there is a way in which this entire reporting works, right? Banks in the country report to the tax authority. The tax authority, based on the standards, uploads the information on the platform, and the other jurisdictions can access information, okay, from Kenya, and so is Kenya can access information from the other countries. So I think this is a beautiful way in which the cost of seeking the information, the time involved in seeking the information, all this has been curbed once you join this club. Okay, so Kenya has sort of joined the club already. We are in the final stages of being in the sharing of information. So I'll come to that. Now let us understand that who are these people who are supposed to be reporting. What is a reporting account? So I would like to just highlight that currently, as the bill has come in, right, the guidelines relating to CRS has still not been released. The bill says that the CS will release the guidelines in due course. So we'll wait for the guidelines. But we have had experience of dealing with CRS in other jurisdictions, and this is what we have seen is a global norm. Okay? There is a definition of a reportable account. Okay? That whose account is required to be reported. So let's say if I'm a tax resident in Kenya, and let's say Matthews has a tax residence in Kenya, and Kenya is the only place we do our business, and we don't have any offshore accounts, we don't have any offshore businesses, then my account is not treated as a reportable account, okay, because there is no risk on my account. Okay? But at the same point of time, there could be non-resident foreign parties or individuals who are holding bank accounts in Kenya for various reasons. It could be business, it could be past accounts, but they are not tax residents in Kenya. So what the banks are going to do, that they will generate a list of these kind of reportable accounts of people who are not tax residents in Kenya, but they are holding accounts with them, and make a summary of all that with their bank balance and XYZ, and report it to Kenya Revenue Authority. Kenya Revenue Authority will upload it on the database, which will give access to other jurisdictions, saying that, okay, there is a Hong Kong resident, with a bank account in Kenya, or there's a Russian tax resident with a bank account in Kenya, and then they will utilize that information for the tax compliance. So this is now outward information, what Kenya Revenue Authority is going to give out in respect of non-residents with accounts. But at the same point of time, Kenya Revenue Authority will also access information about, okay, those Kenyan tax residents who have accounts outside or have businesses outside, and will seek that information in here to assess that is there any chance of a tax evasion, okay, by existing of this offshore. So I think we will have to wait and see that what kind of guidelines are coming in. But my experience on this with CRS handling with other jurisdiction is that the norms are pretty much standard, already set, unless some tweaking changes are done. And then the first exchange of information Kenya has committed that they will start doing in 2022 is when the first exchange will happen. So I think these are again healthy moves. I don't think that we should be immediately feel felt very highly concerned, because even if you have companies outside Kenya, as long as those companies are active companies and they are doing appropriate businesses, they're not sham companies or shell companies, you are not restricted to operate businesses outside Kenya. So I think by the time these guidelines come in and you would like to evaluate any situation relating to any of your foreign companies, you being a tax resident, we'll be happy to be of service to you. So I think with that, Matthias, back to you.
Thank you, Simant, for that well elaborated response. Now, in our next agenda, we want to combine some few changes that have come in, which are going to affect the final tax. This is among the agenda that we discussed about. I'm referring to the pronouncement and changes in record retention. I'm also talking of carry forward tax losses and on double taxation. These are new changes that are coming in that definitely are going to affect the final tax position. We want to understand the salient features of these aspects so that we can all understand this. Simant, if you can pick the three items each at a time for us to understand it clearly. To you, Simant.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Matthias. So record retention, is pretty straightforward. Our current provision says that that you need to maintain your records minimum for a period of 5 years, from the end of financial year. But now Companies Act says 7 years. So there was a bit of a mismatch, that your company law says 7 years, income tax law says 5 years. So I think KRA has utilized that opportunity to increase the time period and have more time with you to engage you and do your assessments, right? Again, I think my personal view is that I don't think this is a very welcome measure. When we're talking about a strong digitization story in Kenya, we should be looking to reduce this time gap, right? All your filings are online, right? And I don't think of any tax returns which are not online available now. So we should now KRA should look to give back the investments done in the digital space to reduce the time gap for doing the assessments. Like similar examples with other countries, majority taxpayers are getting faceless assessments getting completed, paperless assessments getting completed within 1 year or 2 years. So I think that we should be looking to receive some dividends from our digitization story, especially relating to iTax, and reduce the number of years rather than increasing it. But no, but it is there right now. It's there. Let's see if it goes through. I know that there are people in the lobby group who are not happy with this provision, because now remember, we are in 2021, we have to maintain records till 2028. Our teams changes, and the way we keep our books and records, it's difficult to hold something for 7 years time. I don't think it's a very healthy move, but I think that is what it looks like right now. Coming to the next one, on carry forward or unabsorbed tax losses. So now the change is basically that currently you are allowed to carry forward your tax losses for 10 years. Okay, so there is a time period defined. KRA is now saying that we will allow you your carry forward of unabsorbed tax losses indefinitely. So there will not be any time limits, which I think is a welcome move. Okay, but I think that on the other side, it's actually a sweetener against minimum tax, because we are, I think KRA is already in court with 2 lobby groups on minimum tax. So if minimum tax stays, then I don't think it is of a very large consequence, because you still end up paying minimum tax even if you're a loss-making company. So I think, KRA has tried, to balance it by saying that, we will fight for minimum tax, but will allow you, to carry forward your tax losses, indefinitely. In my, view, minimum tax in its current, in the way it is currently structured, is something that is not acceptable, and we should look to fight it as close as possible. If minimum tax goes and carry forward unabsorbed tax loss remains, indefinitely, I think the sweetest position to have. So let's see, where we proceed, with it. On the double tax avoidance arrangement, I think it's a bit just a small cleanup that countries with whom we have double tax treaties, right? There was no provision currently under the Tax Procedure Act to clearly define that what supersedes what, right? For example, if your treaty is in some way contrary to the tax law, which will prevail. So I think now that has been codified in the tax procedures law, and it's saying that if you have a bilateral arrangement entered with a foreign country, then that bilateral arrangement will supersede, and any information gathered as part of that exchange of information under the treaty should be used with the terms and conditions in that treaty. So I think that comes sort of a clarity and a protective measure, right? So back to you, Mathis.
Thank you, Simant, for that. Now, in the next segment, we are going to look at some of the changes that have come through. This is on the VAT and the excise duty. And I'm going now to give my co-panelist, Stanley Mwangi, this opportunity to take you through. Just a reminder to our participants that the top 10 agenda that we had taken them from the various thematic areas of this proposal bill. Remember, we have income tax, we have VAT, excise duty. So we had taken the top 10 agenda from there. Now, Stanley Mwangi is going to take us through VAT. To you, Stanley Mwangi, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Matthias. Hi, everyone. As you are informed by my colleague, I'm Stanley Mwangi. I'm an audit senior at 5 Elements Advisory. And I'll be taking you through on some of the proposed changes on VAT and excise duty that we wanted to highlight to you. So we will begin on the export of taxable services. So in the new bill, there has been a reclassification of the export services from zero-rated status to exempt status. The proposed bill seeks to reclassify the export services from zero-rated to exempt services. In our opinion, the exempt services have always been zero-rated since the end user is in a different country and jurisdiction. So the different interpretation by KRA is definitely going to cause a strife due to the different opinion everyone has. In our opinion, this is an ill-motivated move, and it appears to be a reaction by KRA to deny VAT refunds to taxpayers. All this appears to be like due to the various litigation losses KRA has faced on the tax tribunal and High Court. Also, in terms of equity, it seems to be unfair given that goods exported out of Kenya are zero-rated, whereas like the importation of giving that Kenya is one of the highest funded countries next to Nigeria. So on the other part, also, we are going to look at the reverse VAT, which has been like a clarification and a clear up on some of the issues which were pending. Previously, reverse VAT was only affecting persons who are VAT registered. But on the new bill, the reverse VAT is applicable to all persons, both registered and non-registered persons. For VAT registered persons, reverse VAT charge, the reverse charge VAT on import services is only applicable if the registered person is not entitled to claim in full input tax payable in the tax period when they import a service. Also, we'll look at the solar energy, solar and wind energy sector. The bill proposes to reclassify the specialized equipments for solar and wind energy from VATABO to exempt upon recommendation by the commissioner by the Cabinet Secretary for Energy. This, in our opinion, this is a welcome move, since it ensures that the cost of solar will decrease and also promote the development of clean energy sources. But also in terms of consistency with the way the tax regime has changed over the period, it has always been hard in terms of like doing your strategic planning and decisions. Because if you look in the last 2 years, there have been various changes. Like in 2018 it was exempt, then in 2019 it was exempt, in 2020 was then changed back again to general rated, and now back to exempt. So in terms of like the planning of on a strategic level, it has always been hard, but we hope that it will always be consistent compared to whatever has happened. There's also been previously, like if you are selling solar to you are selling electricity through the solar, you are only able to claim investment allowance if you are selling to the government as an additional to the national grid. But with the proposed bill, you can claim investment allowance even when selling to private entities. So I think that one will be a good change on the sector. And I think with that, Simant, what's your view on the overall matters relating to export of taxable services and
Right.
solar sector?
Right. Thanks,
Simant.
Nali. I think you fairly covered it. I think, for those of you in the call who are wondering that what is the difference between zero rating, and exempt, because in either case you're not charging your customers, any VAT. Please note that, when you are under zero rating of a service or a good, right, the VAT that you pay in Kenya in respect of your expenses, like rent or electricity or sales promotion, etc., you can claim that as a refund back from KRA if you're under zero rating. However, if your service or goods are exempt, all the VAT that you incur in your cost, okay, there is no refund. Okay. And that's why, we believe that, this specifically this change that has come in relating to making export of taxable services as VAT exempt is a bit of a regressive step. I know this kind of drastic move in tax policy, again, which is not in sync with the global norms, is not welcoming. Because, when your cost increases by 16%, export oriented, service businesses can become uncompetitive in global parlance, right? And remember that Kenya is still an entrant in the very vibrant, BPO sector and the KPO sector. And where competition already exists in a very, very well established, way from countries like Indonesia, Philippines, India, Singapore, right? So we are already a little late entrant, to that market. Plus, it discourages FDI in the export-oriented, service segment. I was just reading, a recent release, which says that Kenya now attracts the second largest startup funding, in the technology sector. Okay, so you have FDI coming in your tech startups, and then, we have this sudden shift in provisions coming in. Okay. So I think, eventually what will happen that, if these provisions are not changed, some of these companies might decide, to shift their base outside, Kenya. And eventually what will happen is that, trying to trade off to make the 16%, we will lose the 30% on the corporate tax. So I think, in our view, I strongly believe that, this kind of provisions, should be revisited before they are presented in the final budget. And then, on the solar and the wind energy side, I think, the only thing that we want to highlight, as Stanley has covered, is that, companies that are engaged in manufacturing can claim investment allowance in respect of the investments that they do in plant and machinery. So what is happening now is that the new definition of manufacturing has been amended. And what it is saying that any company that is engaged in transformation and distribution of electrical energy would be eligible for investment allowance. So they have removed that clause that if you transfer and distribute only to the national grid, you can claim investment allowance. That removal of that clause of giving to national grid, I think is a very welcome move. So that, the current clause allows, more players, to come in. And I think this will invite a lot of strategic players in the solar sector who can, after required licensing, establish solar farms and, supply electricity, to the country. So I think overall, this is a welcome move. So Stanley, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Usman, for that. I think on the next part, we'll be looking at some of the exemptions which have happened and leviable which have changed. The government in the new finance bill has exempted medical equipment and inputs such as ventilators and breathing equipments. This is like a way to give back to, it's like a way to give capacity to fight the pandemic. Also, previously on the imported of sugar confectionaries, this was only, excess duty was only levied to imported sugar confectionaries, but on the proposed bill, both the imported and locally manufactured will be levied on excess duty. Of course, this will negatively impact on the consumption of sugar confectionaries. Also, it has also exempted the fees and commissions for loans. And also, it has also exempted previously the imported glasses at an excess duty of 25%, but with the proposed bill, imported glasses will be exempt. These of course will increase consumption for manufacturers who heavily rely on the imported glasses. And also it has imposed on the excess duty for motorcycles from the previously, which were 11,000 to 15,000 on the motorcycle value for every motorcycle value which is imported. And also jewelry, which was from a nil to 10%. Generally, in our view, this is like a way for the government to generate additional revenue. And of course, in terms of the motorcycle industry, to encourage more people to buy local, to make it locally instead of importing. I think with that, I will hand over back to June so that she can conclude.
Thank you very much, Stanley Mwangi. Thank you very much, Matthias. That was a very, very elaborate discussion. And so before we even go for our health break, Mr. Simant, I have a question. Let's say someone has joined, one of our participants, and they're not in the finance field, neither are they in the tax field. And in their head, they're thinking, so what should we make out given what is going on in our economy? Right now, Kenya is deep in debt. Every day we are reading another loan, and so we are wondering, are the policies, responding, and what should we be concerned going forward, Mr. Simant?
Okay, thanks, June. I'm generally a very big proponent of the Kenya brand. I'm a big seller of Kenya brand. So I think that we have to look at a bit balanced. When I look at Kenya's story, in 2005, Kenya's GDP was around $18 billion, right, which is like same as Tanzania in those times. And now in 15 years time, our GDP is about to touch $100 billion, right? That's like 5x growth in GDP in 15 years. Kenya is one of the very few countries in the world where population is still growing at 2.5 to 3%. The only other countries where I know that population is still growing is probably India and Indonesia. Okay, because majority of other countries, developed parts of the world like China, Europe, Singapore, everyone has depopulation happening. But we are some of those countries left where population is still growing. And growing population is a dividend as it boosts domestic demand, and in some way it also insulates us from global trade shocks. Then you look at our digital transformation success story. Our mobile penetrations are over 100% of the population. We have formal financial inclusion in the Kenyan population. Almost 70% own some kind of formal bank accounts, M-Pesa accounts. So the financial inclusion is significant in the last 3-4 years. The tax revenues have jumped the roof with iTax coming in, e-citizen is there, county payment wallets are there, and things are getting more transparent, and we have done away with the time spent that we were doing in administratively handling of regulatory affairs. Similarly, if I look at FDI is generally, foreign direct investment is generally open in most sectors in Kenya. And if you travel actually to other countries in Africa and Asia and then come back to Kenya, you will see the ease of doing business in many ways in Kenya can get to you, because we've got opportunities and challenges, and there where we that's where we found. But I think at the same point of time, after this phenomenal growth of 15 years, okay, in the last 15 years that I talked about, we are in a certain situation right now. Just like if you see in our careers, we start our careers in the age of 24 or 25, and then after 15 years, when we hit 40, we get into a phase that is called a midlife crisis, right? Where you now want to start looking at reinventing yourself, right? So you start looking for new avenues of growth, and you're worried with how you will sustain your success. So I think somewhere we are in that phase in Kenya right now. Okay? And what happens in this phase is that your decisions are weighed on between short-term benefits and success for survival and long-term value and legacy. And this is where looking at some of these changes, a lot of things have happened well, even in terms of tax laws, I believe. But my view is also that somewhere we're also making some tactical mistakes. Okay? For example, like you talked about debt, right? We read in newspaper that we are heavily indebted and we go bankrupt. I think there's a lot of noise around debt. But my view is that debt necessarily is not bad. Okay? China's debt is 200% of its GDP. So debt, and they're still growing, right? And they're growing at a much larger base than our base. The issue is whether those assets where these investments have been made using the debt, whether they are yielding returns to you higher than your borrowing rate. It is just like running your business, right? If the return on your capital employed, okay, is higher than your borrowing rate, then you're doing good. Okay. Our issue is that we don't have that information. Okay, whether the investments that we have done in the last 7-8 years, whether it's SGR or otherwise, right, whether they are giving us the returns higher than our borrowing rate. And I'll be happy once I get to see that data, or if anyone has, you can share with me. I'll be very happy to look at that. Our average income per person in Kenya, which is fancily called in economic GDP per capita, our average income per person in Kenya is $1,800 annual. So let's say 180,000 shillings annually. While if you look at countries like Singapore, who got their independence around the same time, okay, when we got our independence, their average income per person is $65,000 per year. Why is that such a big shift? Where we are, and where countries like Singapore or South Korea is because if you actually go and study their economy, you will see that they were encouraging savings by Kenyans, by their citizens right from the very start. And they were parallelly providing strong governance support in those companies where this, or those institutions where these savings were getting invested. And many times especially during these times when we are in sort of tax return filing situation, I constantly get asked that what are the areas of tax planning in Kenya, right? And especially for an individual. And let me tell you, there are very limited areas to do tax planning for an individual. Your insurance reliefs are capped at 60,000 shillings. All kind of insurance, whether you take life insurance, you take health insurance, you take education policy, the entire insurance relief is capped to 60,000 shillings. Your pension contributions that you can do, all pension contribution, NSS, recognized provident fund, everything is capped to 240,000 shillings a year. Okay. If you decide to sell a property and invest that money in another property, we don't have any capital gain tax exemption. So technically what is happening is that we are not encouraging savings in our economy, and we are not lowering our tax rate. If we encourage savings, if we give tax relief on savings, okay, and lower the tax rate, what is going to happen? Our disposable surplus will increase in our hands. What will happen to this disposable surplus? It will go and chase consumption, will spend money, right? So eventually you will make 16% on VAT by carry. Or this additional savings will result in wealth creation. It will bring excess liquidity in the banks. What are the banks going to do? They will lend it to export oriented units. Our net exports will become positive, right? And eventually we'll have a more healthy GDP. Right now our GDP is growing by consumption, not by positive exports. And this is the formula I think we need to closely look at and see if that can change, that our GDP should grow because of positive net exports, okay, and not purely by consumption. And this formula has been proven successfully by countries like Singapore and South Korea, okay, which I think all of you, when you find time, you can go and research about it. So again, my last point, before we end this session is basically that, stability in tax policies is very, very critical in order to invite, long-term investments. Sudden shift in tax policies like minimum tax or, making export of taxable services, exempt from VAT, transfer of businesses, we have seen a post-COVID phase where people are trying to kind of, trim themselves down, right? You're merging 2-3 businesses to run one. But interestingly, if you transfer a business from one company to the other company, it is subject to VAT, which is of no sense because my business is still continuing. I have just merged and aligned them to operate probably in a more lean way. But now there is a VAT that becomes so I think these kind of short-term tactical measures to gain tax revenue does not help in long term. It actually gets to a long-term loss of our vision, and we should avoid that. But I think with couple of those points of areas where we need to really otherwise I must say that we are a very, very vibrant private sector in Kenya, and it is doing its best through advocacy to ensure that there is a good balance. So I think with that, June back to you.